Welcome to the Out of Bounds podcast. I'm John Luck with Mary Evers, and, well, our two teams are done. Our
True.
two teams are dead in the water. They don't exist anymore.
They
Just
exist.
cancel the rest of the calendar.
I'd just like to point out that the Celtics were, in fact, eliminated before
Yes.
the Bruins. The Bruins at least got to the second round. The Celtics didn't. They got gentlemen sweeped out of the first round.
Yep, and we will talk about the Celtics in just a little bit, but we do want to start off with the Boston Bruins as they lost to the New York Islanders in the second round of the Eastern Conference playoffs, or was it the quarterfinals of the NHL? However they're doing it nowadays. It was a 4-2 series loss, and the Bruins just really collapsed at the end of the day.
Yeah.
If you want, I will just sit back, let the Bruins fan complain, and eat my popcorn.
I mean, my complaints stem mostly for the defense. I mean, losing Kevin Miller and then subsequently, what? Nope, don't eat into the microphone. That would be gross.
I told you I have my popcorn.
Nope.
Fine.
Nope, put it away. Yeah, that would be disgusting if you started eating into this. And then losing Brandon Carlo, it would have been. It was not great for them. McAvoy wasn't playing well. Grzelcyk wasn't playing well, and it didn't help that Tuukka seemed to just have given up. You know, as Tuukka does. The only problem is that when Tuukka gives up, Bruce Cassidy apparently has no way of telling that, unlike the rest of us. So the only time we saw Swayman was one period of hockey during the second round, even though Tuukka was terrible. And the Islanders had Tuukka's number all season. So not entirely sure what happened there. And then, like always, every other line except for the perfection line stopped scoring. So it's basically the same shit that happens every single year to the Bruins.
I think at the end of the day, this is just kind of a microcosm, this series, of everything as a whole that's been wrong with the Bruins. You know, you look at Game 6, you know, you're coming into this with either a win or go-home situation.
Yeah.
And through the first few minutes of the game, the Islanders looked like the team that was down 3-1 in the series.
Right.
And the Bruins are walking around like they're zombies on the ice.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, this was a combination of age, injuries, and do the players want to really be there?
No.
And you could see that with some of the entries into the offensive zone for the Islanders. We talked before the show. I thought initially Tuukka Rask said something to the players that made them all angry because the Islanders got some clean looks at Tuukka Rask.
Yeah, like I said, the defense just was not playing up to par. And now I don't know. Charlie McAvoy got a pretty bad hit last night during Game 6, but I don't know if he was injured prior to that too. He just was not playing up to his usual standards, and like I said, Grzelcyk wasn't either. And those two, unfortunately, because of all the other injuries to the other defensemen, had a lot of weight to carry, and they weren't able to do it. And which I guess is not super shocking because, well, they're both in their early 20s at this point, not used to it. But they'd been playing well all season, so it was really disappointing to see them do so poorly in this round of the playoffs.
I mean, the defense core was always a question mark.
Yeah.
Ever since Zdeno Chara left for Washington.
Right.
I mean, you went into the series without Kevin Miller. Brandon Carlo, as you mentioned, got taken out in Game 3, I believe.
Yeah.
So McAvoy and Grzelcyk, I would think from a league perspective, and again, hockey dummy over here.
Right.
I mean, maybe they're a good second pairing, but there's no way that's a good top pairing for an original 6 team like the Boston Bruins that had those expectations.
I know, yeah. Especially because neither of them are very physical guys. They're both, more known for being fast skaters, and stick handling is great. And, they're a good pairing and they're good hockey players. But, like you said, they just, that entire defense without Miller was lacking any kind of toughness. And when Carlo went out, you kind of saw it with Tenorti originally in that, the first game that he played, but it just wasn't enough. So it was hard because I remember we talked about this after the Washington series, how what the Bruins needed to do was, they played up defensively and tough-wise to what the Capitals were, and they just forgot about that going into the series with the Islanders. It was like, and the Islanders aren't as tough of a team as Washington is, but if the Bruins had kept that up, they would have worn the Islanders out a lot faster than they actually. I mean, they didn't end up wearing them out at all because they were still the most energetic team, even in that Game 6, even though they were up by like 4 goals.
I go back to one of the Nelson goals, I think it was. The first goal that Grzelcyk just kind of gave up on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That was some nice stick handling there. I think it was by Brock Nelson.
Yeah.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong.
I think
but
you're right, yeah.
I mean, going from center ice, going around Grzelcyk, around a couple of defenders, doing some S-curves into the net, that was nice.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just kind of a small sample of what happened all night long.
Yeah.
I mean, the Islanders just came to play, and the Islanders just looked like they wanted to be out there.
Right.
And I think this maybe speaks to a bigger issue here, and that is the fact that this Bruins team is so top-heavy. You talked about the perfection line.
Mm-hmm.
The second line, you had Krejci and Hall, and, I mean, the Washington series, they did pretty good.
Yeah.
The Islanders series, though, they just fell apart.
Yeah, they weren't part of it at all, really.
Meanwhile, the second line for the Islanders, they were probably the most productive line for either team this entire series.
Yeah. Oh, no, yeah, for sure. And this is, when we traded for Taylor Hall, it looked like all of a sudden the Bruins were a team with a little bit more scoring depth, and that was something that they've needed for years now, and it's something that I don't think they've even had since 2011, was another line that could be as scoring productive as their top line was. And obviously the top line was different in 2011, but not by much. And so when he showed up, it was like all of a sudden they can beat the Islanders now. That was kind of thing because with Taylor Hall, because they really were terrible against the Islanders all season. And then we got to the playoffs and Taylor Hall disappeared, and because Taylor Hall disappeared, Krejci disappeared, and I mean Smith was there but didn't make much of an impact either. So it sucks. It really does. But this goes back to what we talked about before. Just Taylor Hall, is it because he just simply doesn't know how to play in the playoffs? Because he has very, very little experience in the playoffs compared to the guys he was playing with. I mean, he has less experience in the playoffs than some of the youngest guys in the league on that team.
Yeah, it's such a sharp drop-off because the perfection line, realistically, maybe in a few years, you could see any one of those numbers or all three numbers going up to the rafters because that's the type of success they're going to have.
Right.
Once you get to lines 2, 3, and 4, the Bruins are a laughingstock.
Right.
I went through and tracked the couple of games for the last couple of games, I should say, for the Washington series and the first couple of games for the Islanders series.
Yep.
And some of these stats are just god-awful. So game 2 against the Islanders, the one that they lost, Ritchie, 1 assist, 2 shots, 4 penalty minutes, 21 shifts. Coyle, 1 goal, 4 shots, 26 shifts. Coleman, 1 assist, 20 shifts. That's on the third line for game 2.
Yeah.
The fourth line, Sean Corrali, a -1 on 20 shifts.
Shocker.
Lazar, 1 shot on 18 shifts. And Wagner, 1 shot on 17 shifts.
Yeah.
That's not going to get it done against the Islanders, and maybe it's better that they didn't beat the Islanders.
Yeah.
Because you talked about this over the past few weeks. This Bruins team was going to get absolutely curb stomped by the Tampa Bay Lightning.
For sure. I don't have much hope for any team against Tampa Bay. I think Colorado would have the best shot out of all of them. And as hot as Montreal has been, I don't think that Carey Price is going to be able to hold up the level of play he's been having against the scoring that's on Tampa Bay. And maybe this just goes back to wherever Tom Brady is living at that point. They're going to keep winning championships, guys.
He was the honorary banner captain for one of the games this round.
Was he?
He was. It was virtual, though.
That bastard. He never did. He was never a Bruins fan captain.
He never went to minicamp, OTAs. But another story for another time.
We're not talking about football today. We are going to have the entire summer to talk about football, and we will talk about football for the entire summer.
Maybe some basketball.
No.
But when this series first started, the big story was the Garden crowd returning in full force. I mean, there were a few rows behind the benches that were tarped off, but that crowd on Saturday night for Game 1, that was nuts.
Right, and the Pastrnak hat trick, that just added to it because it's like you can't even imagine something like that happen. And I think, Pastrnak didn't have as good of a season as he did last year, especially. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that there were no fans, because I think David Pastrnak's the type of player that kind of thrives off the noise and the cheering and even the taunting, honestly. So I think that was a big factor for him, and that's why, first night back with the full crowd, he scores a hat trick, and he says after the game that it was like they were all playing their first NHL game because it had been so long since they'd played in front of a lot of fans like that. But they just weren't able to keep it up. Like in that game one, I mean, as a Bruins fan, I felt like they could do anything because they played so well in that game. And then it just, they won another game, but their effort level just slowly declined until last night. And it looked like they were just, yawning and checking their watches to see when the game was going to be over.
I think, unfortunately, this is one of the first signs that this team is getting a little too old for themselves.
Yeah.
We'll talk about Rask in a second here, but just getting back to the crowd on that Saturday night, I mean, it sounded like a jet engine taking off as far as it was on TV, but overall it was great to see. And then the Islanders crowd showed up in full force down on Long Island, which I think they played a pretty big part, both fan bases, in deciding the series.
I think so too, and I also think it was an extra push for the Islanders because this will be the last year that they play in this facility.
It is?
Yes, I know. They brought it up 150 million goddamn times on the broadcast. Anyways, so that's got to be something too. Like it's you want to have a really good season if it's your last season in this facility you've been playing with in, I think they said since 72, I want to say. Right. So it's been a while, and the deeper they get into the playoffs, the more games that they'll have in this place. So the Coliseum, the name just popped into my head.
Nassau Coliseum.
Right, it just popped into my head. I've been saying facility. But
the barn. The barn,
yeah. So it'll be the last time that they can play in the barn, as Pierre McGuire kept saying 1.5 million freaking times. So I hate Pierre McGuire so much. But that's, that doesn't matter to me because the Bruins have stopped playing now, and NBC won't have any more broadcasts.
I mean,
for the NHL.
How do you really feel? Just getting back to Pasternak, though, and you brought him up when you talked about the crowd coming back. The turnaround that he had from the first 3 games in the postseason run, he had 2 assists, 2 points, 19 shots on goal for an even plus-minus.
Right.
The next 4 playoff games, 5 goals, 3 assists, 8 points, 21 shots on goal, and a +5. To me, I think Game 4 of the Washington series, that's where this thing really turned around. The Bruins started looking like they had a shot at making a deep run in the playoffs.
Right, yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. And, they had a lot of a way easier time with Washington than I think anyone was expecting them to. And I think as a member of the fan base, I think we all kind of let that get to our heads a little bit. I mean, me and you said, not last week, the week before, that we didn't believe that whoever won the Capitals-Bruins series would actually beat whoever won the Pittsburgh and Islanders series. We ended up being right, unfortunately, because, obviously, all right, for me it was unfortunate because obviously I wanted the Bruins to go far. But, it is what it is, and now we have to look into the future because a lot of these guys now are unrestricted free agents.
Yeah, we'll talk about that either later on this show or come up on the next podcast. But I want to get your thoughts on Game 5 of the series.
Okay.
Because that's when fans, coaches, players just went off the freaking tracks.
Yeah.
I mean, as a member of the green team, when I start bringing this stuff up, I'm called a crybaby and I'm blaming other things. But nope. Good old Bruce Cassidy comes up, says the referees weren't good. Oh, the referees sucked. Every call was on the Bruins. No. It's called, unfortunately, your team didn't show up for a little while. Get over it.
Well, the team didn't show up, but there were also some missed calls.
There were missed calls. Richie elbowed a guy in the head, got fined $5,000. That didn't get called.
Well,
lest we forget in Game 6, the Bruins did go on the power play 3 times. So, listen, I mean, that one power play the Bruins got called for, maybe that decided the whole thing. Maybe we should just run it all back.
I mean, I also feel like Bruce Cassidy needs to realize if he's going to talk an enormous amount of shit, he's going to actually have a team that'll back him up, because last night they were just chanting New York Saints in the Coliseum.
I love that.
Yeah. Well, you can't talk shit unless you can back it up. And unfortunately, Bruce Cassidy could not back it up.
So Cassidy was fined $25,000 after making these comments, and I have a few of the excerpts here. Tell me if this was worth a $25,000 fine. I think they sell a narrative over there that's more like the New York Saints, not the New York Islanders. I could go on and on. Maybe we need to sell them more. Flop. But that's not us. You just hope they'd see them, and the same calls go against us. So it's not like I'm sitting here and saying, well, every call against us sucks. That's not true. It's just that at the end of the day, the similar plays, they need to be penalized on those plays. So before this, Barry Trotz, the Islanders head coach, pointed out the fact that Patrice Bergeron got a lot of breaks and a lot of calls benefiting in his favor on the faceoffs.
Right.
So Bergeron did get called, I think, out of a few faceoff circles.
He got called out of the first one. Yeah.
So after those allegations by Trotz, Cassidy says, they just need to be better than that. Call the game as you see it. Quit listening to these outside influences and get it done right. I don't think they are great tonight. I'm not going to lie to you, but they have been, and they're good guys and good officials. I just felt like tonight they were off. I think that's worth a fine.
Oh, sure. And I think he knew he was going to get fined by saying it. There's no way he didn't.
I mean, you can go ahead and say, yeah, the referees are great guys. I go drinking with them after the games. But you go ahead and say something to the effect of they're not good, that's a fine. Right.
I mean, it's one thing for like the fans to complain about it on Twitter, but when you get in front of your press conference and start complaining about it, you're going to get fined. I mean, that's just the state of every single sport at this point.
And unfortunately, the referees, you know what? Yeah, they missed a few calls. Unfortunately, this happens in every sport all the time. Look at Sunday Night Baseball, the Red Sox and the Yankees. What was the one pitch that everybody talked about? The pitch from the Red Sox closer, Matt Barnes. It was about a foot off the plate.
Yeah.
Gets called for a strike.
Right.
Did you hear the Yankees players and coaches and fans going off the rails? Yeah, a few of them got tossed, but do you hear them in the post-game press conferences saying, God, these umpires suck. They screwed us out of the game.
No, I think the problem with comparing it to the MLB is that the MLB is way stricter when it comes to that stuff than any of the sports are, because like the MLB wants to suck the fun out of everything, even complaining. So I feel like that's why you don't hear it. Like if the Yankees had gone to the press conference and complained about it, I probably would have agreed with them. Now I don't agree with the Yankees very often, but I do it's kind of part of the entertainment value of sports is, having these narratives stay around and complaining about things, because sometimes you're just whining about it, but other times it kind of, spurs on the next game. So now the other team that's getting attacked is like, well, I'll show you we can win without the officiating giving us any breaks.
I think Berube did that in the Blues Cup final. I think it was.
Yeah.
So it came back up. But this thing really turned around during Game 3. The first 3 games of the series, Boston outscored the Islanders 10-7. Since then, and understanding there were some empty net goals, the Islanders outscored the Bruins 15-7.
Yeah, terrible.
That gives you more of a concern of age and effort here going forward. And you talked about the impact that this could have on the expansion draft coming up here, because I mean, some of the players that the Bruins could reserve make sense. Your Pastrnak, Marchand, Bergeron. But, I mean, now we're starting to talk about reserving Sean Corrali and Coyle and players like that.
Well, Corrali, you can't put a protection on because he's unrestricted free agent. The expansion draft is only for players who are under contract.
So let me get the names up here. For players that are coming back next season, as far as I have it, the perfection line, Marchand, Bergeron, Pastrnak, Craig Smith, Nick Ritchie, Charlie Coyle, Kasha, Jake DeBrusk, Lazar, Wagner, Frederick, and then going to the defense core, Grzelcyk, McAvoy, Lausanne, Carlo, Zaboro, Clifton, Moore, and then Jeremy Swayman, who probably should have started Game 6.
Probably. Yeah, no, he definitely should have, because I feel like at that point they didn't have anything to lose. And we talk about this a lot with, we've talked about it with the Celtics. We even had to talk about it with the Patriots this year. Sometimes it feels like they forget that elimination games are happening. It feels like they think that they're just going to, oh, this is a bad game, so we're going to, just not show up and we'll come back next week. And I think sometimes they forget that there is no next week. You have to actually play well. And I think that's exactly what happened. And I think it even happened with the coaching, because I feel like if the coaching had really wanted to continue, they would have put more thought into starting Swayman in goal.
Here's how to look at this. I think if you're a coaching staff member, if you put Tuukka Rask in there and you get the doors blown off, which you kind of did in Game 6,
yeah,
that's a fireable offense in some places. If you put Jeremy Swayman in there and he gets the doors blown off, your job's safe because the backup was in there. Mm-hmm. You gave the kid a shot.
Yeah.
He threw up all over himself.
Right.
So unfortunately for Bruce Cassidy, I look at that move as that would have been job saving.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. And it also would have protected the future of the team more, because honestly, you see what's happening, like we talked about with Taylor Hall, like these players that are that don't have enough playoff experience not showing up when they really need them to. And I think now with not giving Swayman the experience that he could have gotten this year, it's going to set him back to be from where he could be being a good playoff goalie coming up.
And unfortunately, I think the schedule kind of played into this as far as overvaluing some of these players and maybe undervaluing them, because you only played against, 7 or 8 different teams this season?
Right.
Next season, you're going to go ahead and face everybody in the NHL, so you can maybe hide under the teams like Arizona or, Detroit, teams like that, Florida probably. Unfortunately, when you're
Florida
playing...
was pretty good this year.
Yeah, I mean, they had their little blip up. But,
yeah.
I mean, it's kind of a year-to-year thing for them.
We'll see what happens.
But when you're playing the likes of Washington, Pittsburgh, the Islanders every night, unfortunately, the goaltending is going to look a little skewed. And when you face teams like the Rangers, the Devils, the Sabres, unfortunately, then your third and fourth line and even your second line, all of a sudden, they look like they could play on a Stanley Cup winning team.
Right. And that's basically what happened this year.
All right, so we'll talk a little more about the Bruins coming up next week and how they'll approach the offseason, because it's coming up now for the Bruins as they choked against the Islanders. But from one bad team, we go to a...
worst team?
A calamity, I think. The Calamity Celtics.
Yeah,
we weren't on last week, but boy, there was a lot of news from the Boston Celtics. Danny Ainge announced his retirement / we think he got fired.
He definitely got fired.
But he is no longer the president of basketball operations. That job now goes to Brad Stevens, who moved from being the head coach of the team to now the guy that calls the shots.
Yeah.
At the press conference, Wick Grossbeck said, Danny came and said it was time. It was completely his decision with no support whatsoever from ownership in making that decision. Yeah, right. None was offered. No support was offered except for wishing him the best once it became clear that that was his decision. Now, Danny did say that the heart attack he suffered, I think, a couple years ago did play a small role. And I mean, I kind of look at that and say it probably should.
Yeah,
because
for sure.
They said that he couldn't even watch the games live because it could have done some real damage when they were in the playoffs.
Yeah.
But let's just kind of take this piece by piece.
And that team is a lot of stress.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions. We'll get to them here.
Wait, let's go back. When did he have this heart attack?
I think it was during the Kyrie era.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense to me.
Heart attack, brain aneurysm, one of those things probably could have happened.
It's probably both.
So let's take this piece by piece here, because there's a lot of layers to this onion known as the Boston Celtics.
Right.
The Ainge move. Right call to make, or the right time to step away, maybe?
I mean, it seems like it was the right decision for him, which if this is the right decision for him, congratulations. Enjoy your retirement and your less stressful life. I hope it works out for him. The timing is interesting simply because Celtics fans and radio hosts and what have you have spent the last season looking at Ainge and Stevens and being like, are they doing their job properly? Because the way this team is consistently built up to be one of the top teams in the league, and they consistently failed to reach that mark. So a lot of people were like, well, you can't sit here and say that Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown aren't enough talent for the team, because they're both very talented players. And, the supporting cast might be left to be desired, but they're also pretty decent players. So is it the coaching that is causing the issue, or is it the questionable moves that Danny Ainge has made in free agency and in the offseason that have caused this? And a lot of people thought it was Danny Ainge. And, it's hard to argue with them, especially after the what happened with Gordon Hayward leaving and losing Kyrie and the
Isaiah Thomas.
The Isaiah Thomas of going back to, honestly, starting with the trade that brought Kyrie Irving here and we lost Isaiah Thomas, his role as a GM has become, it's come into question. And it doesn't help that, it's the hoarder Danny narrative about the draft picks didn't help. And it's just kind of a lot of small things that suddenly all piled up together. And it was mostly this season, I think, that people were like, I don't think Danny's doing a good job anymore. And so I think, I'm sure his health and his personal issues had something to do with him stepping back. But I think the timing is interesting because so many people were questioning his ability to do his job this year.
So I think there was a bigger story to look at, and I'll get to that in a second, but just getting back to Danny Ainge's impact on the Celtics, to me, his career is always going to go back to the couple of big trades he made. The Brooklyn Nets trade that sent Pierce and Garnett to the Nets for all those draft picks that we know what that turned into.
Right.
But the Isaiah Thomas trade, at the time, I thought that was a pretty good trade.
Yeah.
I mean, I looked at it as it's not our fault that Cleveland wanted to take a guy who knowingly had a fractured hip.
Right.
It would be one thing if this was something that was tucked away in the medical journal.
Right.
Unfortunately, this was on worldwide television.
Yep.
Isaiah Thomas getting hit in the hip, falls to the floor, and he's done. Unfortunately, that's the Cavaliers' fault for taking that trade. Now, looking back at it through an NBA player's mind, if you're coming to Boston and you sign a long-term deal here and you get hurt, how does it look if you're getting traded because you're hurt from a guy like Danny Ainge who's done this before? We heard that was the big reason Anthony Davis, through his father, didn't want to come to Boston because he didn't want to get treated the way Isaiah Thomas did. And God knows Anthony Davis has just as much injury time as Isaiah Thomas.
Which is fair. And I also think that then they tried to overcompensate with Gordon Hayward and centered a lot of things around him a little bit too much coming back from injury, because without him, those young guys like Brown and Tatum were doing really well. And I think that when Hayward came back and it was clear that the team was maybe favoring him over other players, I think that set back this team a lot. So I think Danny Ainge was struggling with, on one hand, it looks like I treat injured players terribly, and now they overcompensate with Gordon Hayward, so now it looks like it's like you don't care with the players that are actually performing well for you.
Well, Gordon Hayward, I think that was more of a solid to Brad.
I mean, sure.
I mean, his butler boy coming in and, best buds picking him up at the airport.
But I feel like at that point, Danny Ainge could have stepped in and been like, you're losing your locker room.
Well, realistically, and I will still say this, and I will say this until the time I'm no longer a Celtics fan, the worst thing that ever happened to this team, Game 7 against the Cavs. You made it to Game 7 with Terry Rozier, Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum.
Who's a rookie.
Right. And Marcus Morris.
Right.
You made it to Game 7 against LeBron James and the Cavaliers, who are ready to quit and give you the series.
With Hayward and Irving on the bench.
Yeah, and then you go ahead and say, thank you for everything you guys did, Jason, Jalen, Marcus, Terry. We're going to go back to these guys.
Yeah, Terry, you can leave.
And looking back,
Morris, you can leave.
Looking back, Terry Rozier might have been the best option for point guard.
Was Horford on that team too?
Yes.
Yeah, I think losing him was a big issue for that team too.
Yeah, unfortunately, Horford, I wouldn't sign him to the $4-year, $100 million contract in Philadelphia.
For sure. But I also think that it hurt the Celtics losing that type of player, because I don't think they've had anyone that could have replaced him since. Never
know. Could get him back. We'll bring that up later on as well.
Yeah.
But the point I was making before about Danny Ainge leaving the Celtics, the bigger thing, what Brad Stevens is due.
Right.
He signed an extension recently, I think within the past year or so.
It was when they were right before the bubble, I think.
Yeah, so he was due to make a lot of money. And if he goes ahead and leaves the Celtics and goes somewhere else, or no, if he doesn't go somewhere else, just leaves the Celtics, that's a pricey tag to have on someone that you're not going to get anything out of.
Right.
This is kind of the two birds, one stone situation. Danny Ainge doesn't want to be here, we believe. Brad is under contract to us for a long time, but we don't know, what Brad Stevens' worth is here as far as a head coach goes.
And I really want to know what the timeline of this is, because I feel like it was either Brad Stevens, when the rumors about him taking the Indiana job came up, it was either Brad Stevens already knew what was going to happen and knew that he was going to move to the front office, or when Brad Stevens made it clear that he wasn't going to take the Indiana job, the Celtics were like, oh shit, we were hoping he would, so we didn't have to pay him anymore. Now we have to find a way to still pay him and not have him as the head coach.
So that's possible. Apparently, Brad turned down a $70 million offer to go to Indiana, which, if that's true, there's something going on there.
What the hell is the Celtics paying him? That's what I would like to know.
So April is when the story came out that he turned down a $70 million offer. So let's call it a couple weeks before that, probably the end of March, roughly.
Yeah.
That was around the same time as the trade deadline when Daniel Tice got traded. And Brad told Sean Grande from 98.5 that he was completely caught off guard.
Yeah.
And he's pointed out the lack of centers this season. Is it possible Brad went over Danny Ainge's head to ownership? Is that maybe something to look at here?
I mean, it's possible.
You know what? Danny Ainge is the guy that calls a shot. He's the one that manages the roster. I feel as a head coach of the Boston Celtics, as the guy that has the number 2 or 3 most wins in Celtics history, maybe it's time to get rid of Danny Ainge.
I mean, it's possible. I just, I really want to know, like, what was going on in Wyc Grousbeck's head this year, because we know that he knew about the heat that Stevens and Ainge were getting all season, because he addressed it a couple of times, and I think he called into 98.5 at one point and said that they have complete faith in both of them, and you don't normally see ownership of teams calling in, and you definitely don't see Henry and the Jacobs family doing anything stupid like that. Like, occasionally Bob Kraft will get on the air, but that's about it.
Jacobs needs the rotary phone to dial in.
Jacobs is such an... Oh, God. Anyways, so, obviously the ownership group knew what was going on because they addressed it. And it obviously Wyc Grousbeck's not going to get on the air and be like, yeah, don't worry, guys, Ainge is gone at the end of the year. He's, quote-unquote, retiring, but we're actually kicking him out. Like, that's not going to happen, but, I think it's interesting that you're right. I think at that point they had to have known. I don't think Danny Ainge called up Wyc Grousbeck the day after they got eliminated and be like, I'm announcing my retirement today, give Brad my job, and then hang up. Like, that's not what happened. Obviously, this has been weeks, if not months in the making. So, yeah, I really wish I was a fly on the wall for those conversations.
Well, don't forget he called into Toucher and Rich while he was on the golf course during the playoffs. But
well, I mean, that shows you exactly how stressed out he was about the playoffs, because he had to golf instead. And if there's anything that'll bring your heart rate down, it's a nice round of golf.
Let's keep going here, talking about... Yep, we'll just leave that one alone. So to add another layer on top of this, it came out from Ian Begley, who is an NBA insider for SNY, saying, quote, a prominent member of the Celtics organization wanted to fire Stevens in season. Ainge reportedly saved Stevens' job.
Interesting.
Something tells me the end of March, beginning of April, they had a powwow, kind of like how Kraft, Belichick, and McDaniels had that powwow, I think, at Davio's.
Right, yeah.
Something tells me they had that discussion and said, okay, guys, we need to figure stuff out because there's a lot of money on the line, and there's a lot on the line as far as the star players on this team.
Yeah.
And so I think ultimately... beginning of April, when the news came out that Stevens turned down that $70 million contract, I think then is when he found out that he's going to be the president of basketball operations.
Yeah.
He's coaching a lame duck playoff run.
Yeah.
And just kind of run out the string here, We're probably going to get steamrolled by the Nets, which we'll talk about in just a second. And the day after the season, we'll just rip the Band-Aid off and go from there.
Yeah, I know. And, I think it was Woj that tweeted that Stevens hadn't necessarily been happy coaching since the bubble anyways, and we knew he kept going on all those long walks, and was it to get away from his players? It may have been. And then I think the comments that Danny Ainge made in his farewell press conference, if you want to call it that, about how he couldn't relate to any of the players anymore, and that was an issue for him, because we've talked about this a lot, and we've talked about how having former players be coaches or in the front office is helpful for basketball teams especially. The problem is the game that Danny Ainge played is not the game that they're still playing in the NBA.
Nope.
It's so different. And I think he's right. I think he couldn't relate to any of his players anymore. And now I don't think Brad Stevens can relate to them either, but I think Danny Ainge was having a harder time with it, because the difference between Ainge and Stevens is that Ainge is expecting them to do things the way the Celtics have always done them. But the problem is that this isn't a Larry Bird team. This is Jason Tatum's team, and Jason Tatum is a different type of NBA player than Larry Bird was. So I think he was having a hard time letting go, and I think Brad Stevens is hopefully more capable of evolving with the current landscape of basketball, and maybe listening to these guys a little bit more and seeing what other teams are doing, because Danny Ainge wasn't doing that.
No, and unfortunately, the bubble had a long-lasting impact on player psyche and the mental status, but the coaches as well, because don't forget, the coaches' families weren't allowed to come into the bubble, I think, until halfway through the conference semifinals, maybe the conference finals, but they didn't have their families there, and Brad is a family guy. It's been well noted that he's a family guy, and, maybe he just wanted to spend more time with his family. Now, we'll get to the coaching vacancies, but think about this, the possibility. Is it possible Brad Stevens is traded? What I mean by that is there are some spots that are looking for a coach that needs to handle the young talent, a coach that can't be in a top 6, top 10 media market, because Boston is nuts when it comes to the fan base.
Yeah.
Is it possible maybe he goes to Indiana for the Pacers? They just fired their coach.
Yeah.
Maybe Wick does something with that ownership to trade Brad Stevens for a Miles Turner and somebody else. Does Wick do what Danny Ainge didn't do?
Right.
Same thing can be said for Portland as well.
That's interesting. I mean, I haven't thought of that, and it's it's kind of like the Bill Belichick thing with the
Doc
Jets
Rivers.
and Doc Rivers, right? And I just don't see why they would have announced Danny Ainge would become the president of baseball operations if they were going to do something like that, because they could have just said that Danny Ainge was retiring and left it at that for now, if that was Wick Grossback's plan all along. And, maybe Wick could have told Brad that they would consider him for the job. I don't think they would have straight up said immediately after announcing that Danny Ainge was retiring that they were going to have Brad take over his job. But I could be wrong, and they could pull the carpet out of under all of us, but I don't think that's going to happen.
Because I think we're going to kind of find out with this next topic here where the team goes, and that is the names that are being rumored for coaching vacancies.
Yeah.
I went through a couple of websites here, and a few of the names there are your popular names that you've heard a lot about.
Right.
But a few of them I haven't heard of at all. So starting off here, Jamal Mosley from Dallas, an assistant coach. Ime Udoka, I apologize for the pronunciation, but he's from Brooklyn. Darvin Ham, Charles Lee from Milwaukee. Then we get into the names that have been rumored a lot. Kara Lawson, the head coach of the Duke women's basketball team.
Yep.
Becky Hammond, the San Antonio assistant coach. Sam Cassell, Chauncey Billups, Lloyd Pierce, the former Atlanta Hawks head coach. And then the name that's starting to get a lot of traction from Boston, Portland, and Orlando, Mike D'Antoni.
Yeah.
Is there a name on that list that you think should be the head coach? And is there a name on the list that you think will be the head coach?
I'm going to be honest with you. A lot of these guys I don't know. I mean, I follow the NBA enough to follow the Celtics for the most part, and that's kind of it. Like, obviously I know about the big players, but assistant coaches, I don't know anything about. The only assistant coach on that list whose name I recognize is Becky Hammon, and that's just because she is a pioneer being a female coach in the NBA, and it's not something you see a lot of. Also, obviously, Kara Lawson was a coach here in Boston before she went to Duke, so her name is also familiar to me. I don't see her leaving Duke,
no,
to be honest with you, because I wouldn't leave Duke in general. You
can't figure out where Duke is, but you wouldn't leave
I would not leave. If I was coaching at Duke, I would not leave, because like Duke is a huge school and always competitive, and are probably paying her a very decent sum of money. Becky Hammon is interesting to me because I think she's a very good coach. I think, learning under Pop is obviously gives her a leg up on the other candidates. Mm-hmm. I think, honestly, being a woman gives her a leg up on some of the candidates because it might be, the Celtics in general have been often I don't want to call them a progressive. They've usually, they were the team with the first African-American head coach. And, so they're usually ahead of the times, I should say, when it comes to adding diversity to their team and their high-level position. So I think it would be interesting seeing either one of the female candidates be it. I think Chauncey Billups is probably the Celtics' first thought at this point, and I think he'd probably be the most likely candidate in my opinion. But I don't think I know enough about all of them to sit here and tell you this is definitely going to be the person they hire.
You mean you don't have the Darvin Ham playing card?
I don't.
Or the trading card?
I also, don't know if the other teams that are in need of head coaches can pay these players more.
Yeah.
Because that sometimes will come down to be a big factor. I don't know if you know this, but money talks, John.
I understand this, yeah. So let me ask you this question.
Okay.
Do you think the Celtics could hire someone just to be that progressive team that you mentioned? Because they were blasted on First Take by Stephen A. because Brad Stevens just slotted into the president of basketball operations job.
Right.
Do you think they could make a call in hiring a Lloyd Pierce,
right,
a Chauncey Billups, Becky Hammon, Kara Lawson,
mm-hmm,
someone that checks off progressive boxes?
Right.
Do they make that move just to show that, you know what, we are the Boston Celtics, but we are a progressive team.
Right.
We're going to name this person as a head coach.
I think at this point, obviously media is going to kind of influence things. It always does. And what people look at when they look at the Celtics, that's going to come into play. But what I think the Celtics need to pay more attention to, especially if they want to succeed going further, is who the players want. I think they need to take into account what Jason Tatum thinks and what Jaylen Brown thinks, especially, and the other guys as well. But I think you pull those two aside specifically and say, you guys are the young guys in this organization. You're the ones signed to big contracts and going to be here for a while. We want to make sure you stay happy here. Obviously, things are not going well. Who is it, if you had to pick? I'm not saying that they only take what they say. But I say they should have a say in the decision, because that's quite honestly how the NBA works now. And I think someone like Kara Lawson, who knows these guys and was around when they were rookies, would be interesting for them. And not just because they know her or not just because she's a good basketball coach, but I think it'll say a lot to these young basketball players, and especially Jaylen Brown, who is, very vocal about being more progressive and being more accepting to other people. I think it will show a lot of good faith to them if you consider very, very heavily these candidates.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. This has to be one of those moves that you take player input on.
Yeah.
We've seen it in Brooklyn. We're seeing it in LA. We saw it in Miami.
Right.
Give the top players on your team say.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that's going to help them sign an extension when their contract is up.
Yeah.
And it's going to show that you have faith in them,
right,
to have faith in you.
Yep.
Because Brad Stevens is going to have to make some difficult calls on some of these players. Marcus Smart, Kemba Walker, Jaylen Brown potentially. So now is the time when you have to really start figuring out your future. I mentioned it time and time again during the pandemic, the fact that the Celtics need to make their 5-10-year plan. And it's for reasons like this. Like you said, I think Kara Lawson is a good choice because she does have familiarity with the players.
Right.
I would lean more towards Becky Hammon because, like you said, she coached under the Pop Tree.
Yeah.
She won the Summer League, I think, a couple years ago.
Yeah.
And she knows how to handle those superstar athletes and keep them in check. I mean, if you're Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown or Marcus Smart or Kemba Walker, whoever's on the team next year, are you going to go ahead and tell a coach like Becky Hammon, an accomplished coach, Coach, listen, I've been at this longer than you. I know what I'm doing. Step aside.
Right.
You're not going to do that.
Right.
Becky Hammon is someone that's going to come in, command respect.
Yeah.
And I think she's going to have that Popovich mentality, which that's going to be an eye-opener for the Boston Celtics.
Right, yeah. I think if there is any name on that list that I would personally like to see the most, it would be Becky Hammon.
I will say D'Antoni is interesting because we've seen in the past how he manages talented players like James Harden, Russell Westbrook, and Chris Paul, I should say, in Houston. D'Antoni will be interesting because he's been a big part in Brooklyn with the Kyrie, Durant, Harden management.
Yep.
How does he handle the management here, I wonder, and such the precipitous drop-off from the likes of Tatum and Brown all the way down to Shemi Ojeleye.
Right. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I don't know too much about him at this point, but if you can handle, like, we all thought the experiment of KD, Kyrie, and James Harden was going to be a massive failure. We were all wrong. At least for now, we were wrong. It looks like they're doing pretty well with each other. And if you can handle that, I think you can handle Jason Tatum's attitude a little bit.
So let's go ahead and talk about the Brooklyn Nets because they, as you mentioned earlier, it was a gentleman's sweep and it was a 4-1 series loss. Had we known that everything was going on behind the scenes, the fact that this team won a game, that deserves a standing round of applause.
Yeah, I feel like the only reason they won a game is that they were like, they had to win one game at home with a full crowd because it was the only one they were going to get. Yeah, I'm amazed that they won because they really just didn't see it. Like, I mean, that entire series, with the exception of the one game that they won, they were playing like the Bruins played at Game 6. Like, oh my God, my tea time's like 30 minutes. I got to get out of here. Like, that's what it seemed like to me.
Well, much like the Bruins, the Celtics just had pretty much a microcosm of their season happen in the last 3 games. Kemba Walker, out.
Injured,
Robert Williams, out.
Yeah.
Jaylen Brown, the wrist injury, which that's a freak injury. You can't really say too much about that.
Yeah.
But the injuries weren't the reason this team lost.
Right.
It was the fact that they just lacked the talent level that the Nets had. It was such a drop-off. I mean, the games in Brooklyn, it looked like an and one tape at some points. But unfortunately, the Celtics just had to figure out their roles. And that's why I think this is going to be one of the most interesting off seasons in Celtics history.
They've got to do something, and they need better depth, and they need, I think, another star player. And we've been, we'll go on and on and on about this because it feels like we've been having the same conversation about this team since Isaiah Thomas was on the team, because it was like, oh, well, we're getting Kyrie Irving. There's your star player. And we got Irving and we got Hayward, and they just drafted Tatum, and it looked like things were going to get so much better for this team. And then, Hayward got hurt in a freak injury, and Kyrie his knee was hurt before, and it just got worse.
Then he needed a nose job. Don't forget that.
And then he, obviously didn't like it here. And then, so you lose Kyrie, and then you get back, and you get Kemba, and Kemba's a walking injury. And it's just like, and, Robert Williams, he was playing so freaking well, but it's just like one thing after another with him. It's like, first, like, he just doesn't seem super invested because he can't make a meeting on time. And then, because they had so many players on the team, he wasn't getting a lot of minutes. And then when he finally moves up and he's getting a lot of minutes, he gets injured. And it's injury after injury after injury, and it's just it's so unsatisfying because you want him to do well, but it's just not working.
And that's the maddening thing, because Robert Williams is a very talented player. I think on any team he's a good number 5. He's a good starting center. unfortunately, and this was pretty much advertised when he came out of college, he was going to be an injury risk. He wasn't going to be productive outside of the paint. He was just there for the dunks.
Yeah.
And it's going to be interesting to see how he works into the plans. Is he used as trade bait? Is he going to be traded by Brad Stevens even though he was hurt?
Right.
There's a lot of questions. And moving forward here, one question to think about is how is Kemba Walker's role going to be on the Celtics?
Yeah.
Is he even going to be a Celtic? There was a rumor earlier this week that Celtics and Kemba Walker were talking about a potential breakup.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's not surprising to me because they didn't seem to want him around this season. The problem is it's a lot of money on his contract to get rid of him. So
Over
I don't
$60 million.
Right. And it from the reports it said that he was mad at the Celtics because they tried to trade him during the season. But then was that Danny that was trying to trade him? Because if Danny's gone now, does that solve Kemba's issues, or was it Wick that wanted him traded and then that just leads to more issues, or was it Stevens that wanted him traded and that leads to something? But it seemed to me during the season that Stevens had little to no say in who was on the team and who wasn't on the team.
Yeah, and that hopefully is going to be fixed now that he is the guy calling the shots.
Right, you would think so. And I hope that he, sees what happened to him and involves whoever the next head coach is in these decision making, because I think it's important to have your head coach in the loop about those things.
And I will say something that works out in the Celtics' favor if they do trade Kemba Walker is the fact that there's not going to be as many back-to-backs. We saw the impact that had on the Celtics.
Yeah.
But also the fact that Kemba Walker can adapt to anything going on.
Yeah.
When he was on the floor and it wasn't a back-to-back situation and he could play his game, there were flashes back to cardiac Kemba at UConn.
Yeah.
You have to hope that you can upsell Team X that can take on that contract, because if you move Kemba Walker's contract and the team you trade him to takes on a lot of the money, which is possible if it's the right team,
right,
you can go ahead and get yourself a good starting center and try and make a 3-team trade. There is still money off of the trade player exception there from the Hayward trade originally. I think it's like $15-16 million, something like that. I could be off with that figure, but there is money at least from that trade.
Right.
And how does Brad use that to upgrade what he has at the point guard position? Because 1 and 2 on the floor, or 2 and 3, however you want to look at it, 2 of the top 3 scoring positions on the Celtics, you're all set on.
Right.
Number 4, most likely maybe a Marcus Smart. And then number 5 would be Robert Williams. But one trade that we're hearing that I've been seeing tossed around is trading Kemba Walker to Oklahoma City for Al Horford, getting that to work out.
Yeah.
But then again, you raise the issue of what are you getting back for a point guard?
Right.
Because that is among the priciest positions in basketball. It's like the quarterback in football.
Right. No, I agree. And the Celtics really haven't had a decent point guard since Isaiah Thomas at this point, because as talented as Kyrie he did not perform up to expectations here. Like, you can't deny that. And I'm not saying, I wouldn't say that he's a bad player. I just think he didn't work here, and that's fine. It happens. But it's been a long time since they've had a point guard that can actually get them places. And quite honestly, I feel like maybe it was a mistake to let Terry Rozier go, honestly.
Yeah, I'm looking back at it.
Because I think he would have been better. It would have been better to develop him more than to get Kemba.
I mean, you can Monday morning quarterback this Celtics team 7 ways to Sunday.
Yeah.
You can always look back and say, well, they probably should have signed Terry Rozier instead of Kyrie Irving, going with that option. They probably should have held on to Rajon Rondo longer, but that's just some of the questions that Celtics fans and Celtics ownership now have to ponder. This is surprisingly the 10th anniversary of Out of Bounds. Hard to believe. We started
for you, yeah.
So some people have moved on and actually did stuff with their lives, but nonetheless, we started the show, I should say, on BTV 10 years ago, a few months after the Bruins won the Stanley Cup. And we're going to celebrate the 10-year anniversary coming up in the month of August. But we figured to celebrate the 10-year anniversary, we look back at some of the past moments on Out of Bounds. So we're going to play some clips from the past 10 years, and I mean, these are from way back in 2013 when I think Mary was like 10 years old.
It wasn't, but okay.
We're going to play them.
17.
Okay. Still much older, or still much older. Anyways, so we're going to play a lot of clips, including myself, Ryan Berard, and Corey Clodman, the 3 original hosts of Out of Bounds, before Mary kicked them all out.
I didn't kick them out.
Took their jobs.
Took
their office space.
Oh, God, here we go. I didn't kick anyone out of anything.
All right, so we're going to play you a flashback here, going back to 2013, and there's a second one that I forget the year. But anyways, just to give you a little bit of context, the first clip you're going to hear is Corey and Brian analyzing the effects of PEDs on players because Dan Shaughnessy had wrote a scathing article about David Ortiz using PEDs and not really being eligible for the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
So we're going to have that one. Then shortly after that, Brian's going to give us a description on marijuana and the impact it can have as far as PEDs go. And, well, I mean, I took it as something else. I think we learned on Out of Bounds back in 2013 or 14 how to beat a drug test. You be the judge. But nonetheless, we look back at the years on Out of Bounds.
This is what we saw with Nomar Garcia-Parra. I mean, the cover of Sports Illustrated. You kidding me? You telling me he wasn't juiced up on that thing? I mean, and then he kept hurting himself. And that's just the result of PEDs. Once you get off of them, you're going to start getting injured because your body can't handle it anymore.
Your body's used to having having the tolerance of the PED, so your body's a lot stronger with it. So then once you stop taking, it's one of those things where once you stop taking it, your body kind of gives up because it doesn't have the amount of strength that it had with it. So
like withdrawals.
You're pretty much a drug user. I mean, your body craves a certain amount of testosterone, and if it can't produce enough on its own, then it shuts down. Your kidneys start getting screwed up. Your liver can get screwed up. Then you're on dialysis. And
the medical hour here.
Sorry, I'm telling you.
Starting to get more depressed than anything else with this topic.
You don't want a dialysis pump. That sucks.
And don't get me wrong, we're not trying to say that everyone here is a drug user. I'm just saying. Yeah, but like the thing is, marijuana is not a performance-enhancing drug. You don't like take a hit of it before the game
do you get suspended for taking it? Or if you get caught with it in the NFL?
No, just drink a lot of water, man. You'll be good. Get it out of your system. I'm just saying.
I love how he just told people how to beat a drug test.
No, he didn't. No, he didn't. I didn't say that, dude. We'll edit that out, all right?
The funny thing is, never got edited out.
I was going to say, I thought you were going to say the funny thing is it works. I tried it once.
No.
I don't know what you do.
All right, so that's just an idea of the things that we'll be playing for you on the Out of Bounds podcast, which if you're watching us on BTV, which we are simulcasting on, you can follow us on Twitter. Let me pull up the Twitter handle, @OOB New England. If you want to follow us on Twitter, we put the podcast up there every week. If you're listening to the podcast, you want to see us. I mean,
no one wants to see us.
Now, see, that's not nice. People want to see us. We're friendly people. Anyways,
debatable.
hop on YouTube, search BTV Access Corporation. Again, that's BTV Access Corporation. And we thank you for watching and listening to the show. We'll talk to you next week.